So a little while ago, I streamed myself doing a 3D walk cycle live, and it went pretty well. This video cuts up that stream into a much more concise step-by-step tutorial that you can follow along with. Quick disclaimer, I answered questions throughout the stream that you'll see at the bottom here, and sometimes they cover up the graph editor, and I apologize for that. But for this tutorial, we don't actually use the graph editor that much, so don't worry about needing to look at it until I mention it. Focus on the character and how they move. In future streams, I'll try to avoid having questions on screen like this. Also, you can use whatever program you want, whether it's Blender or Maya, and any rig you're comfortable with. I use Maya, but there's only a few things that might be specific to Maya, otherwise everything is universal. Just make sure that the rig you're using has two things: IK legs, so the legs stay in place as you move the character's body, and foot roll, so you can peel the foot off the ground easily. If you like how this turned out, I'd be happy to do more, so just let me know down in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you like it. Okay, so let's start. Let's say we're animating a walk cycle that is 1 second long at 30 frames a second. We're just going to focus on the leg feet positions for now. So we'll put at frame 0, we'll put the feet like that. And then we'll also do that for frame 30. And then since the walk cycle is 30 frames long, 1 second, and we want the second step to happen right in the middle, frame 0 to frame 15, one step, frame 15 to frame 30, back to the beginning. The other thing we'll do is we want to move the body down and then up. So let's say this is a good position that we want them at. So we'll again key their upper body in this position for frame 0 and then for frame 30. And we'll continuously be doing that because we want it to loop perfectly. So we want frame 0 and frame 30 to be the same throughout the whole thing. So right after they take a step, we're going to move them down immediately. And then as it goes back up, right before the next step, then we'll move it up a bit. So it kind of creates that like long S curve where right after a step, it goes down right away, and then it goes up and then back down right away. And then we'll do the same thing for the next one. So as is like this, we will just have up and down motion and the feet sliding like that. Looks very silly, but once we start adding more and more to it, it'll start to look more correct. So for example, like I said earlier, you want to look for rigs with the foot roll controls. Then you can start bending the legs as they sort of go backwards. So we'll do the same thing at frame 0. And frame 0 for this one as well. We'll rotate each of the foot roll controls like that. And then we'll key the same on frame 30. I'm going to separate these a little bit more. There we go. And then we'll copy those frames over to make sure that frame 0 and frame 30 are the same. And then right after a character takes a step, so right after frame 0 and frame 15, we'll snap downwards like that. Whenever a character takes a step, I like to create a big snap rather than like have it kind of come down slowly. I think usually when you snap the foot downwards, it's a little nicer that way. And then we'll do the same. Push this back. So this will go back on its heel at frame 15 and then snap downwards right afterwards. And same to this one. We're going to have it peel off the ground. So have that snap downwards in the back foot. And then this should be peeling off the ground. Do a little bit more and then copy it over. And then we're also going to raise up each foot. So I have foot roll and I have the feet moving in place. And then we'll also raise this one up. Oh, we're actually gonna, let's keyframe each of the feet at frame 15 as well. And then about frame 8, which is like in between frame 0 and frame 15, this back foot, because it's gonna raise up, we're going to rotate it so that right after it comes off the ground, it's gonna raise upwards and rotate. And then as it goes to frame 15 and it's about to take a step, it goes back downwards. So like that. And then we'll do the same for the back leg. I'm probably also going to adjust my foot roll so it stays flat throughout the first few frames like that. And then it starts to peel like around the pass, it starts to peel off the ground like that. And then we'll do the same as we just did for the front blue foot. So I lift it up and then rotate it backwards as it passes, then back down. Looks like it's, I need to do the just this so that it's flat like that, and then peels off. So obviously I am not animating the upper body at all. We're just focusing on the legs and the feet. And that helps us determine the best sort of look for the legs themselves before we move on to the rest. We don't want to do everything at once because then it just overloads your brain. So real quick, I'm going to move the red foot backwards more, right about there. We will lower the upper body a bit overall. It's straightening out the legs a little too much throughout the walk cycle. So I have it just a little bit lower overall. And let's keep looking at this. I think this is too high. Maybe around there, because you want the legs to bend just a little bit so they don't feel too stiff. And then go back down like that. And then as is, her upper body is also, because I haven't done anything to the upper body except move it up and down. We also need to move her upper body forward a bit because right now it's leaning too far back. Generally, when you animate anything with the upper body and you can see the entire character, you want to make sure that the center of gravity makes sense. Right now, because the foot placement is a little bit forward, the center of gravity feels like off. It feels like it should be a little bit closer to here, like right around here-ish, when it's right now, because of the way I animated it, it's a little bit backwards, like it's around here. So let's move her torso forwards a bit. The way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to move the actual keyframes, but you can also just position them, in the frame 0, 15, and 30. But I'm just going to take the actual keyframes and move them up like that, which should move the entire character at once. It's about where I think it should be. It's going to always feel the weight center of gravity and the weight will feel a little off because I need to turn the hips and body inwards and whatnot. But so we'll keep it there for now, and we'll start adding in the arms at this point. So we're going to do exactly what we just did for the legs, but mirror them so that they counterbalance the legs. So you don't want to position your arms so that they are on the same sides like that. Very easy mistake to make. You don't want to do that because that's just not how people walk in real life. You can do that if you want your character to look silly, but generally arms are going to swing on opposite sides. So let's move the arms the way they should be. Again, it will look very silly for a bit. Kind of like that. You do want to have your arms in a position where you can swing them very kind of like that, because you want that sweep between each frame. So let's set up the other arm to do that. Like that. It's not quite a perfect sweep, but it'll get us most of the way there. So let's do the arms for the other side. So I'm also positioning the shoulders as well, if you didn't notice. So I have the shoulders pointed inwards for the front arm and pointed backwards for the back arm, and they're going to mirror each of the legs. So this arm will match this leg's position, and this arm will match this leg's position. And then we'll do the same for the opposite side. So I'm going to select all my controls and then key all the rotation keys at frame 0. I will key them at frame 30 as well. And then at frame 15, move their shoulders inwards. And do it for the other side. And swing like that. And then swing the other one. So they're continuing to mirror each other. And because we already keyed the shoulders and the arms, both frame 0 and frame 30, they'll go back like that. Very stiff because we need to do the actual body animation, and we don't have, forearm animation or hand animation. But again, we're starting very basic. We will leave it like that for now, and then we will add in the hip and upper body movements just so it doesn't look so stiff. And then we'll come back to the arms and do the forearm kind of dragging behind and make it look a little less stiff. So frame 0 and frame 30, we're going to have the hips point inwards. So your hip is going to go towards where your walking towards, and the back of the hips is going to go backwards. And then same as the video, we'll also rotate the hips downwards a little bit so that it sort of like a scale drags the lower part of the hips downwards, down like that. You know what, let's just do the rotation first. So we'll do forwards and then go back on the Y rotation and then copy the frames over like that. A little bit too much. Let's rotate it back. We only want a little bit. So same with the upper body is we want it to counterbalance. So we're going to have that go forward like that. Key our rotations. So the hips are going forward towards the front leg and the upper body is going forward towards the front arm. So right now that would be the red leg is forward and the blue arm is forward. And then we'll do it the other way. I probably have it a little bit too much on that first frame, if I had to guess. No, copy it over. Rotate that inwards. I feel like I do have this backwards, don't I? No, I don't. Yeah, okay, now we're good. You're gonna go back like that. And then forward for the front-facing arm, so it's always pointing in that direction. And then back to frame 0. Yeah, that looks good. As is, my head is not going to stay in place because I don't have world space built in right now, but let's turn that on real quick. So we'll turn on world space for our head. Some rigs don't have this. My rig is built with world space for the head, where as is right now, what I had was neck space, which it will sort of follow where the upper body is pointing. So right now the upper body is pointing to the left, so the head and neck is pointing that way, and then when it turns to the right, it'll point to the right, or her left rather. But if I turn on head follow, what I have is head follow, but it would sometimes be called head world space. Turn on world space, then it will point down the middle. It won't rotate with the upper body. So if I were to go through it, then it stays forward. It does not rotate with the upper body, which just makes it a little less stiff. So let's, just for kicks, we'll key at 0 and key at 30. And let's just do it at 15 anyways. Just for now, just so we don't forget. And then right now we have the arms swinging inwards and we have the upper body counterbalancing the legs. So the hips are going forward and the upper body is going the opposite direction. And from here, we have the basic movements in place so we can actually start polishing it and making it look better. I'm going to add, I would call it drag, on the forearms. So we want the forearm to drag behind the upper arm as it sort of swings backwards and forwards. So let's say on this frame, I'm going to key it at frame 0 and then go forward a bit and have it drag behind by sort of rotating it inwards. Like that. So as it sort of swings backwards, the forearm is going to rotate up. So here's what that looks like without that. So it looks very stiff. It doesn't drag behind. And then here, let me put it back, rotate it up as it's going backwards, like that. And then as it goes all the way back, we're going to have it go right after the other step. So like takes that step and then go back. So the front facing step, it's going to drag by going upwards. And then on the other step, it's going to drag by going backwards. So so the forearm rotates backwards like that. Then it goes back to normal on the last frame. So we're going to just copy it over. So again, as always, frame 0 and frame 30 should be the same. And we have that forearm dragging behind like that. And then we'll do the same for the other arm. Go on the other side, just make sure we're doing it right. Key frame 0. Have it drag backwards. It's okay to break the arm a little bit when you do this. And then as it comes up on the next step, just after frame 15 on the next step, we will have it drag forwards like that. Probably a little too much, but generally it's there. So we'll copy this back over. And just a little bit of drag on the forearms just adds a little bit more character to it. So we added some drag to the forearms and it adds a lot already. Still looks goofy, but that's okay. Also, my knees are pointing funny. I need to push those inwards a bit, right around there. Otherwise, oh yeah, this is a problem with my rig in general. This is something I gotta fix. Is my knees are I gotta adjust them. They'll just go inwards as she walks. Because as is with this rig, they'll go outwards like that as the as the leg is going backwards. So we don't want that. So I'll do it for frame 0 and frame 30. And then we probably have to do the same for the other knee. We'll keep them front facing. That's just with my rig because I'm bad at what I do. So ignore me. Just fixing it for future reference. I think at this point we can adjust the legs a little bit more so they stretch outwards. Yeah, like that's way too short as is right now. So let's push it out because we want it to really be like a fully straightened out leg. We don't want it to be too close to the body or too bent too much. For the front facing leg that's taking a step, you really want it to be fully straightened out if you can, or close to fully straightened out. And then the back leg should be bending quite a bit. You really want a good contrast between the two legs. Maybe move this back because on this pose, the knee's a little too forward. So maybe we can push it backwards a bit, right around here. Yeah, it goes forward a little too fast. So we're going to push this backwards as well. Again, this is when we start to think about the main walk cycle poses: contact down, pass up, contact. On the pass pose, we don't want the knee to be too far forward. It should be just, the knees should be around the same level and sort of passing each other. Right around there. Something like that. Okay, I think that's generally where we want it to be. Let's take another look at it. Might be a little fast. Like I said earlier, we are starting with a 1 second walk cycle, 0 to 30, but we might adjust the actual timing on everything. And it looks like I have one key. Yeah, so right as is, this is why you want to make sure every now and then frame 0 and frame 30 are the same. We'll just copy that over. Right now the leg key is different on frame 0 compared to frame 30. So I'll move that over, copy it just like that. So frame 0 and frame 30 should be the same. So another way you would want to add just a little bit of polish and a little bit more to the animation in a very easy way is I like to make the arms sort of delayed just by like a frame or two. It just looks a little bit more natural. Like it's not like all the keys are starting and ending at the same spot. Contrast that with this, where all of the keys are starting and ending at the same point. But you can see that like hitch, right? It feels like it just stops for a second. Whereas if I take all of my arm keys and delayed them by 2 frames, then you can't really feel that loop point. And you could do that for basically anything as long as all of your keys start and end within basically whatever length your animation is. But with all of your animation controls, it can get very complex to have certain things loop very cleanly. But a very easy way to sort of delay the arms and have them still loop cleanly, because as is, if we were to take all of the arm controls like this, if I were to just move them over, it wouldn't work because I just moved all the keyframes over. It's a cycle. So 0 to 30, it's going to be different, and the first few frames aren't going to have any animation to it. So what we'll do instead is we'll loop all of our keys. So I'm going to select all my controls. I will select all of my keys, and in Maya at least, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can loop it with pre-infinity cycle like that, and post-infinity cycle like that. But generally what you want is that it just loops forever. So if I were to keep going off of the actual range that I have, it will just continuously loop forever. And you just want to make sure when you do something like that, that all of your keys for each control are the same length. And then for our looped curves, so like in our curves at the moment, we have this like hitch here. In Maya, typically you can just select both the first and last key and then spline it. And it will smooth that out for you. So you don't have that hitch, or as obvious of a hitch, whenever the actual keys repeat. So we'll do it for the same for this. So select the first and last keys in our delayed arm keyframes. And then we'll spline it. So whenever we spline it, it'll be a much cleaner loop. But we want it to just like not have a hitch in the actual final loop. Like that. Yeah. So her arms are probably being raised up a little bit too much. So we'll move that down. So we'll drag it backwards, drag the forearms forwards, just like that. And we have a bit of delay in the arms, so it will just be a little more out of sync. So the arms are a little more out of sync with the legs, just to make it a little bit more natural. And as is right now, our upper body is maybe a little bit too low. The walk's pretty fast. One thing I'm going to turn on that is built into this rig, but may not be built into whatever rig you use, is there's a feature in mGear's IK legs called Softness, where as is, my legs have a lot of IK pop to them. So whenever the legs bend, so let's say I have the leg in this position and I move it upwards like that, right around here it's stretching, right? Like as I move it up and down, right? But as I move it up, slowly, there's that pop, right? So that setting in the IK legs, which I get by selecting this control for my rig, is softness, which fixes that. So if I were to set that to 0.5, let's do it for the other leg as well. So let's set the IK softness to 0.5, and we now stretch the leg up. There's no more of that IK pop. So it's a much more natural sort of leg extension than before. So if I were to keep going like that, then you don't have like the character's like legs constantly bouncing. So just to sort of demonstrate, right now the IK softness is on. So that's what it looks like with the IK softness on. And this is what it looks like when it's off. You kind of see how the leg is bouncing, especially the blue leg, like the front leg. That's what that fixes. So that's IK softness off. And that's with it on. So it helps a lot. I'm starting to feel like I pushed her upper body forward a little bit. Let me try pushing it back, because I kind of want it in the center. It's also maybe the front leg needs to be a bit forward. So let's position it a little bit and see what happens. Yeah, I think her back leg could do with going back a little bit more. And then we'll, you know, I think I like that actually. Something like that. Yeah, that looks good. Let's move her upper body a bit more forward. So let's move her upper body just forward a little bit, and then we'll do some more polish on the hands and fingers and whatnot. Maybe about there-ish. You know what? Actually, we'll do, we'll have her back a little bit on this position, and then move the upper body forward a little bit on that position, because the balance feels a little bit off the other way around. Yeah, that feels pretty good. It's just so the center of gravity stays the same. So let's curl the fingers inwards. So my rig has a metatarsal control, just a bit like that, which if you don't know, in hand bones, all your fingers have 3 joints, but you also have an additional joint called a metatarsal that kind of defines the curve of your palm as you like grip something. And usually when you relax your hand, you are curving the metatarsals inwards a bit. So that's what this control does. It's pretty typical with more professional rigs. And if I were to curve it inwards, you kind of get a nice natural curve in the fingers like that. And then we'll select all of our finger controls and curve them inwards like that. And then we'll do the same for the thumbs. The way my thumbs are set up, it's a little jank, but I can still get a good sort of natural position. And then we'll do the same for the other fingers. So we'll curve those inwards. And then we'll do the same for the metatarsals. Then curve the thumb inwards like that. Now we have some more natural position for our fingers. And at this point, we'll also adjust the hands and turn them inwards, because generally when you walk, you are turning your palms towards the body themselves. So if I were to take this like that and position the hand like this, let's select all our fingers and thumbs, key all that, and then go to frame 30 and copy those frames over. And now frame 0 and 30 should be the same. And for the hands, we curve the hands inwards. And at frame 0, curve the hands into the body. That looks good throughout, so we'll leave it at that. But just like we did with the forearms, we'll have it drag behind the forearm and the upper arm. Like that. We'll curve it inwards a little bit more. So as it's being dragged backwards, the hand will sort of curve upwards. And then as it's being dragged forwards, we'll curve it backwards. So we just have a bit of drag in the hand, which makes it feel a lot more natural, especially the fingers and whatnot. So let's do the same for the right hand. And then we'll do the same on frame 30. And then from the first step, go forward a few frames, have it drag backwards a bit. Like that. Let's try it out. Okay, curve backwards. So as the arm itself is dragging it forwards, the hand drags backwards a bit. And yeah, it's curved a little bit too much. It kind of looks like it's being cupped, right? So we'll curve it backwards. It's probably just a result of my rig itself, but we'll curve it downwards, which might not look great. This is the struggle of making a rig that does not have clean rotations. Let's rotate it. Yeah, let's something like that. And then as it's we have to swing upwards as it's being dragged backwards. So each hand is dragging backwards as the arm is sort of swinging, which adds a lot to sort of the natural feeling of it. You know, the arms and hands don't feel as stiff whenever they are actually swinging alongside the rest of the arm. You know, they're not like stiffly kind of staying in place as the arm swings itself. It's actually dragging behind. So I'd say what we need is just a bit of bobbing in the head, the upper body, and the lower body. And we also want to turn and counterbalance the upper body a bit. So let's turn that back a bit. Then we're going to counterbalance the hips this way, just a little bit. You don't want it as much as the hips. Then we'll copy that over, and then turn it back. Yeah, it should be, or at least they weren't as exaggerated as I would want it to be. But yeah, the hips should be rotated upwards with the other side of the hips dragging it downwards. Upper body is counterbalancing it. So if the hips are facing upwards like this, then the upper body's in the other direction. Yeah, do I have it wrong? My brain is always terrible at getting them right. I think that might be the other way around for sure, isn't it? This should be right to me. Obviously, the upper body's sort of leaning to one side a little bit too much, but we can fix that. Yeah, the leg that straightens pushes the hip upwards, if that makes sense. Okay, then I have it right. That's what I thought. It felt right to me. Yeah, I'm just like everybody else, I get that mixed up all the time myself. So just as long as you have that going downwards, then the upper body should be counterbalancing it. So at this point, we're going to take the upper body, and instead of a rotation, we're actually going to start messing with the position of it. So my upper body control, this will differ from whatever rig you use. It's not going to be the same for every rig. And we're going to affect the position of it. So same principles that we had with the arms dragging behind the upper body and the upper arms movement. We'll do the same with the upper body and the hips so that they sort of bounce a little bit. So if this is close to the top of a step, then right after the step is taken, we will position the upper body, this control, so that it goes downwards a bit. Again, your rig might not have a control like this to sort of position the upper body in its entirety, but we'll make it work. So we'll move this down a little bit. So frame 5 or 6, we'll move it down so it kind of bounces and moves downwards. And then about frame 13, 14-ish, just before that next step, we'll move it upward. And then we'll do the same for the next step. So if we do it right, we might have to exaggerate it a little bit. So we have the upper body translate keys. I think, so I kind of go back and forth on doing this, but I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to have a key that moves upward just after the step. So if I'm on frame 0, I move to frame 2 and move it upwards a bit. Then you kind of have the upper body dragging a little bit. So right around there. And then it snaps downwards. And then we'll do the same to this one, have it a few frames after the second step, or even on the actual step. And then after the step, it moves downwards. But basically the end result that we want is a very exaggerated like position with the upper body to have it sort of bounce after each step. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. You can kind of see it in the sort of spine compression. Sort of stretches upwards as the during the up pose in the walk cycle. And then we'll do the same for the hips. So in between each step, we're going to move it downwards. And then around frame 15 or just afterwards, we'll key it a bit upwards. And then just after that step, key it downwards. Should have that sort of bounce to it. It's a little too low. Let's move it up a bit. Okay, pretty good. And then we want to position it so that the hips are moving left and right with each step. So since I already have the position or translate keys in place, I'm just going to take my graph editor and position them where I need them to be. So on these frames, we'll move it, do frame 0 and frame 30, we'll move it to the left. Delete these keys, and then frame 15, we'll move it to the right. Something like that. Still feels a little too stiff to me, so I might have to do a bit more to it. I also have to do a bit with the head. Some of the stiffness is probably in the head, so let's start on that. So same with the hands, we're just gonna have it drag behind. So goes downwards, it drags upwards, and then just after the position in that step, so right when the sort of upper body stops for a moment, then we'll start to drag downwards. Because it's the head bobbing is sort of going to react to the sudden stop of the upper body positioning. So as it's going downwards, drag upwards. As it's going upwards, drag downwards. And then we'll spline our keys so they loop cleanly. It bobs maybe a little dramatic, but we'll live with it. Move them over a bit. You just want a little bit of head bob. You don't want it to feel like the neck is too loose. You know what? Let's also do it to the neck itself. I have a bad habit of not animating necks as much as I should, honestly. Back as it's going down. Forward as it's going up. It's a little bit too exaggerated probably, but I think we can generally leave it like that. Yeah, I think it moves backwards a little bit too much. And probably too early as well, I'd say. Let's loop these and then delay them a little bit. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that looks good. So let's finish this up. I think we're pretty close, honestly. So let's do the polish we wanted to do on the legs. So I could probably delay the upper body movement just a smidge, which would probably help the sort of that downward movement as the character is taking a step. And we'll also spline the keys on 0 and 30, just like that. And then we'll move it over, maybe just a frame. See how that looks. Yeah, I think that looks good. Just one frame over, I think looks pretty good. Her second step is a little too high, so let's lower that. Yeah, it's much higher than the first step. And I think we'll rotate her body inwards. Like that. Key that, then go to frame 30 and key that. So it loops. If you were to flip between frame 0 and 15, 15 being, so frame 0 being our first step and 15 being our second step, these are pretty well mirrored, which is generally what you want. You want them to be pretty good mirrors of each other, each pose. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So let's check if we have that snap we want in the legs. Yeah, and we don't want the leg to slow down too much. We want it to slow down a little bit because otherwise it'll look a little weird, but we slowing down a little too much, which might look weird in a cycle. Because if it's a cycle and they're sort of moving forward at a consistent pace, you don't want it to, you don't want the feet to slow down at some point because their feet should be ideally connected to the ground. You know, they're stuck. So let's see if we can't fix that. I think we'll just try a linear key on that backwards movement, which should be this translate Z curve. No, that's kind of what I mean is I want it to, let's do a separated key. So it's going to go at a consistent pace front to back. So right now we want it to frame 0 to 15, go backwards at a consistent pace. And then we want it to sort of slowly go forward because it's being lifted off the ground. So instead, we'll separate these keys out with this, split them. So on the right side of this curve, we can have it go a little slower as it comes off. Yeah, about that. It looks good. And then, so frame 0 to 15, it's going at a consistent pace. But as it's coming off the ground, it goes a little bit slowly before it peels off the ground entirely. Because by default, if they're linear on both sides, then it would just go at a linear pace and then immediately start going forward, which looks a little bit unnatural. So instead, we'll have it slowly go forward a bit. Then I think for the translate keys, we'll do the same thing. We're going to make these linear keys. So when it's coming off the ground, it's slow, but when it's hitting the ground, it's going at a consistent pace. Like that. Looks good. And then we'll do the same for the other foot. So translate Y keys as it's being lifted up. Oh yeah, it's linear. We already did that. And then translate Z keys. We want it for this side. Pretty good. Yeah, so for a cycle, that will be pretty clean. It'll feel like it's sticking to the ground rather than slowing down each side. So that's most of it in place. I think the up and down movement's a little too dramatic for me, so I might reduce it. I think I want it to reach that highest point for a more consistent amount of time. So I'm going to try and make the upper body movement a little more dramatic. Push this back. So it's a really big snap as it's moving downwards. I go like that. And then it holds that higher position for a bit longer by having two keys. Kind of keep it at that high position. Let's see how that looks. So at this stage, it's pretty much just trying things out and experimenting to see what looks best. It's too fast, I think, for that frame, but for the other one, it looks pretty good. So Yeah, it's too sharp of a drop. Let's take a look at that. But it's almost there. Maybe around these keys. Yeah, that feels great. Okay, that's much better. We can make the foot roll more dramatic. I can set it up so that the foot roll has angles it meets before it starts to peel off the ground. I'm going to set those. That's in this rig. Each angle is basically affects the amount it rolls. So, for example, each angle was set to 20, which was this is a complicated rig thing that is not in a lot of rigs. But right now the foot roll is set up so that it starts to peel off the ground after a certain point, and that feature in the rig affects like at what point does it start to peel off the ground. So I'm going to set it to 45 each and see how that looks. So it should have a sharper like turn in the foot. And then we'll do the same for the other foot. Yeah, just so it has a little bit more of an obvious foot roll to it. Okay, I think one more thing we'll do is I'm going to add a blink to it. So I just have a super basic face rig on Gimberly, but I like to generally have a blink at least once in my walk cycles, just because it gives a character a bit more life. That looks a lot nicer. So I think that's pretty much in place. We'll just add a little bit of the ponytail bouncing. If your character has any extra parts or things that would have follow through or drag, then it's the same as the arms and the head. You want it to drag behind the main part of the body. So let's do the big control that controls everything else first. So drag backwards, it's going down, and up forwards, it's going up. So then we'll do it for the lower part of the ponytail. Because essentially what we want is there's sort of a concept in basic 3D animation where you're animating like a pendulum, and ponytails are effectively like a pendulum. We have 3 different sections, and the further along a section is, the more drag and more delay it has as the rest of it is animating. So if the main rotation is on this frame, then we want the lower part of it to be a few frames afterwards when it comes to the rotation. So we're going to rotate that one up a few frames after this stops rotating, the higher point of it. And then same for the other direction. So it's going backwards now, and then a few frames after this control stops, we'll put a rotation frame the other way after that point. Let's loop it and delay it a little bit. So how's that look so far? That's about as close as my patience will let me get to it. So let's stretch it upwards as part of a drag, and then downwards as the step is taken. Let's add it to this control as well, just to see if we can get a little less stiff. Oh, that's almost there. Because this will just depend on what your character has. Basically just animate any follow through or anything extra on your character, like clothes or skirts and things you want it to drag behind the actual main movement. So let's go forward a bit just to make sure we did it right. So it's not going to look, since we were primarily animating at this angle, it's not going to look good at every angle. That would be part of the cycle, is checking at all angles to make sure it looks good at every angle and nothing's turned too much or twisted and whatnot. But let me make it a linear key. At certain angles, it does look a little stiff. The hand is turned inwards too much. I'm trying to sync the feet so that they stick to the ground as she's walking, which is why you would generally want to, if the feet are visible, you generally want to animate the character going off their control. Okay, that's pretty close. Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, the hands are a little stiff as they are right now. Oh, you know what? Are the hands looping? They are not. That's why. All right, let's fix that. Much better. Yeah, very good. Let's position our camera a bit, set our scene, and then just take a look at it that way. Yeah, not bad. Like I said earlier, I think if I were to continue this, her feet are pretty close together, I'd say. So I'd separate them a little bit more. Characters with longer legs, you want them to be pretty far apart. But I think for 2 hours, the bulk of it being done in 2 hours, I think that's pretty solid.